Hey everyone, Phreak here. Wanted to give a quick update on the 10.1 patch that, at least for me, dropped this morning. There's been a micropatch that came out this day, and so I want to talk about it very briefly, both in terms of what's in the micropatch and how the changes seem to have landed so far. Now, I do want to caveat how they landed with saying this is less than 1 day worth of data. And it's from public stat scraping, which can also often be a bit inaccurate. So, big grain of salt, but I think this will tend to be fairly accurate. So, all right. 10.1 came out, and a few things didn't land very well. There's a bug fix for Aphelios. Okay, that's cool. The biggest thing, though, is that Silas landed too weak. Silas lost. He went from about like 42 to 38% win rate in the jungle, which is a huge loss. He dipped much less in mid lane, dropped only about 2% in mid lane, but still did drop about 2% or so. Maybe a bit more, but you know, a bit more within reason. Still certainly lost some win rate. And the two things I want to talk about with that is one, we actually learned, because public stat sites do a good job of scraping this and putting this data out there, that E max second is definitely wrong. It was something that I considered. I talked about at length in the video from yesterday, or if you never watched it, I thought E max second might be correct. But ultimately, there's not a level up incentive. There is a substantial, like 4% win rate difference. Like we're talking 41 versus 45% win rate. And of course, E max second is his second most popular build. It's about a quarter of all games have the wrong skill order, and it's wrong by a lot. You know, I'm glad people tried things out, but very quickly that skill pick rate should drop substantially, and he'll gain win rate just by people learning. This is what I'm talking about, by the way, when I say, hey, big changes come in, and the champ will take a day one win rate hit, and that will climb. It's things like ability order. We're simply maxing W second, and this is a slightly biased stat, right? If you're a better Silas player, if you already played Silas, you already knew that you were a W max second champion. Now, yes, the changes might push you into E max, but like a bad Silas might have been maxing E max second anyway, and kept doing it because they're not very good. Whereas a good Silas player might have not even read the patch notes and just maxed W second, even not even knowing it was correct or not. But end of the day, it is correct, and there's going to be a win rate difference just by people not maxing E second anymore. Something else that's interesting, though I don't think this is going to remain true, is a decent percentage of Silas games right now are E max first. And they're actually really successful. They're some of his higher win rate builds. They're very comparable with QW. So, you know, there's this small chance that there's actually this like weird, very single target heavy Silas build where you're actually just trying to hit like E into W, and it's just really high single target damage following with the passive. That's probably not really going to happen, but I wanted to kind of throw that out there as some exploration that we've seen players do. All right, so what really happened in this patch, because Silas did ultimately land a bit weak, does need some help. Okay, so 0.2 total attack damage ratio on the passive. AP ratio is still that same 0.25, which is 0.05 higher than it was in the previous patch. Extra 20% attack speed on the passive to help continue to make up for the attack resets going away. And then 0 to 40 damage added onto Q2. And then finally, one more change. So passive buff, Q buff, and W buff, 1 second off the cooldown. Now, of course, this is strictly power up, right? There's no way to sell this in any other way than it's strictly more powerful, so he'll obviously gain win rate from this. Again, we'll gain some win rate from people not maxing E second, or at least less people doing it. And so we do some numbers here. The base damage is up 18%. That's just simply 13 over 11. But considering that a large portion of the base damage is this, like if you think about a Silas build, you need about 600 AP to double the damage right here. Right, 600 AP, 1/4 of 600 is 150. 600 AP to double the damage. That's going to be very, very late in the game, if ever. So this flat, essentially flat damage buff to the passive, definitely really meaningful. 12 damage in the early game, 23 damage in late game. This means quite a lot. This is a meaningful damage bump. It also pushes you a bit more towards considering buying Gunblade, because the AD ratio is another 0.2 higher on that one. You weren't always going Gunblade. In fact, you were pretty rarely going Gunblade, but still a possibility. The AP ratio itself is 25% higher. So that was again in the previous patch, but just kind of putting it back out here for sort of memorization's sake. One thing I do want to point out as I was diving more and more into Sylas builds, rushing Luden's Echo instead of Protobelt was a substantial win rate difference, about 2% or more. And in general, this makes sense. His mana cost got more constrained. Now, people will get, over time, better at managing his mana cost because, well, W cost more, and that takes time to, like, learn the sort of mental memory. Like, I don't want to say muscle memory, because it's not that, but, like, the sort of mental memory of how much can I cast before I'm That takes time to learn, and the numbers got, moved around. Plus, with the W cooldown going down, that you run out even faster. But even still, I think, max W second, go Luden's Echo with these buffs, you get pretty close to a 50% win rate build. So we're getting there. We're not there yet. I don't think you hit 50% during this patch, but this is certainly quite a bit of power. We have the Q damage going up as well. This is pre-post Micropatch, and then the last full patch to now is this setup here instead. Solid 0 to 12% more damage. I mean, 40 flat damage on the Q is quite nice. So you're looking at 380 as the base damage. I mean, yep. That's 280 for the detonation and 100 for the initial chain. I mean, this is a really, really, really high base damage ability. This is the highest base damage normal skill in the game that doesn't rely on things like health scaling, or absurd things like, Nasus Q infinite stacking, obviously. But, so within reason, I mean, I guess Scion Q is probably higher, full charge Scion Q. But, like, you're running out of things that are even close to this. That said, we still know Sylas is a fairly weak performer in general at-home play. So, okay, need some help. Want to point out that, again, this was a 10 to 90 damage increase against the old patch. Again, you still lose the slow on Q2, but obviously meaningful damage increase there. And one thing I had to point out is we had this did 92 to 85% of the old patch damage to minions. It's now 92 to 94% of the old patch damage to minions. So we're pretty close on the minion wave clear. And considering that, losing, 5% of 200-ish is not a whole lot of damage lost, and you're going to make up for that with the passive changes. So by this point now, aside from the 1 second cooldown nerf on the Q, his wave clear is as good or better. He's kind of caught up in wave clear now, especially with this, right? This is the bigger part of it. This certainly matters some as well, but this is actually a pretty meaningful difference here. So, okay, his wave clear is back. His PvP damage is definitively higher. His early game landing is definitely weak. One more thing I looked at with these Sylas stats is his early game win rate is horrible, and it ramps up really fast. Now, in general, every champion's win rate at 45 minutes is about 50%, because if your game goes that long, you must be in a close game. That the combination of your skill and your team composition and the champion that you're playing has all washed out to the game is close. So pretty much any 45-minute game is a 50-50, because if you had the late game, you would have won at 35. That's already in late game at that point, right? 2/3 of games are over by 31 minutes or something like that. So I mean, any weak champion goes up to 50 or toward 50 by the end of the game, and every strong champion goes down towards 50 by the end of the game. That's just going to happen. But Sylas certainly is skewed toward late game. So, if you can survive for longer, you're going to have a better time. Obviously, that's where his stats have gone. All this to say, I think Sylas is getting there. I think this will be one of Sylas's, by the end of this patch, by the time 10.2 hits, we'll have one of the strongest solo queue states for Sylas we've had in a very long time. That's my ultimate take. It's been 10 minutes. Let's move on from talking about Sylas. New Thresh VFX, that's pretty sweet. Let's talk about things that actually came into this patch, though. So Aphelios' nerfs are actually a pretty big deal. Someone was telling me about there's some kind of bug with Aphelios, but I couldn't find mention of it anywhere sort of more officially, so I'm not sure that's really happening. But Aphelios actually took some pretty big hits. He was a pretty, standard, holding steady, 53% win rate champion, and post-patch, he dropped sub 50. 5 move speed and 30 health and this little bit of Infernum ult damage doesn't read to me as a 4% win rate drop. I still have a hard time accepting that that's how big those changes were, but maybe I'm really, really, really wrong, and that he's getting super bullied early game. Of note, by the way, is that Aphelios is another champion who boasts a 60% 0 to 15-minute win rate. Now, that data is not counting current day, where his health went down by 30. That becomes very different very quickly. If I update to today's stuff, it's not a 60% win rate at 50-minute surrender. It's a 55% win rate at 50-minute surrender. But then you go past 15-minute surrender, and he just sits there at a flat like 48-ish for the rest of time. Early game has been brought down some. Clearly, he still seems to be a snowbally laner that in games that last 15 minutes, it's the Aphelios forcing a surrender, not the Aphelios surrendering. This often can mean player perception more so than actual power level. Right? If people realize it's okay, Caitlyn's a lane bully, it'll be fine, will outscale, people won't surrender despite Caitlyn being a lane bully. That kind of thing can happen, right? So worth thinking about, right? It's a muddled stat to look at like 15-minute win rate, because it's of 15-minute games what happened. Anyway, let's move on. But yeah, this ended up having a really big impact. This patch overall, whether it was from these changes or there is some kind of bug introduced or it really is this big, Aphelios is sub 50 win rate right now. So you don't have to ban him anymore. You could have stopped banning Aphelios straight up. Just let it go. He's sub 50. Move on with your life. Minor tap to Aurelion Sol, still high win rate. Minor buff to Azir, still low win rate. Minor buff to Corki, still low win rate. Jax didn't move very, very much. Jace didn't move a whole ton either. Calista is the next really interesting one to me. Calista gained a lot. She gained a lot of win rate here off this one. Really was a big deal. Several percentage points worth. Really awesome to see there. I personally really do like Calista. I plan on playing some Calista myself. She has a much less absurd like win rate by time graph compared to someone like Aphelios. Is above 50 at 15 and at 20, dips down to sub 50 in like the mid game, and then again, we run out of samples really, really quickly when you're starting to cut up games. You have only one game of samples and everything else, so there's not a lot of reason to dive into this stuff right now. But for what it's worth, Calista has less absurd win rate by game time stuff than Aphelios does. But even if you look at like a longer, you look back at like, the last week and a half worth of games, she actually has this like win lane, then dip, then be okay by mid to late for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's happening. Either way, really substantial buff to Calista. She is, I think, definitively strong. Like, Calista is a champion that if you like playing, you should start playing her. She is in a very good spot now. I actually expect that we see Calista week 1 of the LCS. Provided that people are putting games in, like this is the kind of patch change that people should be looking at. People should be playing it in solo queue. They should be playing it in scrims. Calista is good now. Kassadin, minor nerf, cool, good job. Kog'Maw changed, cool, whatever. Mordekaiser, actually, this was a pretty meaningful change. It's actually hit his win rate pretty hard, much more than I would have thought, but really did do some meaningful legwork in dropping his win rate. Another champ who dropped basically to about and then under 50% win rate via these patch changes, which means we actually got a good like 3% off his win rate off a change like this. I am surprised by that. I didn't think that would happen, but it did. So wow. Mordekaiser can also drop off the ban list. Now, he's still strong, and if you don't like playing against him, you can still ban him. But this is not a champion where, oh, it's up, we must draft him. He is in a reasonably balanced state now. So Mordekaiser's landed in a good spot. Calista's landed in a good spot. Because Kassadin's still, I think, too strong. Nami, obviously, this is a strict power buff. Nami is incredibly strong. If you like playing Nami at all, or you simply want to gain elo and support, play Nami. This champ is absolutely awesome. I don't know when Riot's going to nerf Nami, but they really should at some point. I think she could really deserve some nerfs. My opinion, whatever, let's move on. Yeah, looking really good. Definitely gained some win rate. Super, super, super strong champion. All right, next up we have Sejuani, who gained a little bit here. Wasn't all that big, right? 5 health per level. If you're buying armor and stuff, it gets a little bit nicer for you. Again, not gigantic, but, a nice little love tap upwards. Looking at skill orders, W into Q into E is still the higher win rate build. W into E into Q is only about 2% lower win rate. Double checking on like pick rate. So looking at this, looking at just 10.1, it's 42 versus 30%. in skill orders. If you go back to the last full week, it was 46 versus 28. So want to point out that, like, well, this is going to have a subtle effect of lowering her win rate because Emax second is still wrong, but it went from 46-28 to 42-30, right? So roughly 4% of all Sejuani players went into Emax second, and it is a weaker build. It is an objectively weaker build. Now, WQ like went up 1% win rate. So WE went up more than 1% win rate because the rank up also got better. But again, those are counteracted by the fact that WE is a worse build than WQ. So this is why a strict buff, right? She is strictly stronger as a champion. Every single number went up that moved. Win rate dropped a bit from ability order changes. So it's a real effect. It actually happened. 4% of all Sejuani players switched from Q second to E second and were wrong to do so. That number will drop over time, but it exists right now. Next up, and then actually just for fun, Sejuani is a growth win rate champion. Again, worth pointing out that any champion with a sub 50 win rate, which she's at right now, because, hey, Sejuani, she's a low win rate champion, because not everyone does the right skill order. A lot of people do the wrong one, right? Grows towards 50% as time goes on, which, shouldn't surprise many people. Speaking of champions who are doing this, Shyvana is in a similar boat where she's also low win rate early game and then goes up over time. But Shyvana actually is a roughly 50% win rate champion, right? She was like 49 heading into the patch, and then the patch hit, and she's at 50%. So, got about 1% win rate, which is, I think, what we kind of expected to see here on the champion. But here's a champion who is essentially objectively in overall League of Legends play balanced, but in an FF at 15 scenario, 2/3 of the time, she's the one surrendering. She's basically a 1/3 win rate, about 34% win rate at 15. So Shyvana is a champion that if you're in a 15-minute game, she's surrendering more so than forcing the surrender. Not a surprise. Shyvana's not a good ganker. No one expects to get ganks out of Shyvana. If she plays too aggressively, kills herself, like, these are the effects we're going to see. I'm not going to keep doing this sort of like win rate at time stuff in the future, but it helps pad out the video. And it's sometimes interesting. So we had this today. This was the thing we covered today, was a few champions win rates at time. Because why not? But yeah, here's a champion who is balanced and loses hard at 15 and then does well if you're getting out of the early game. Of course, right, she stacks off of Dragon Slayer. She does more % health damage, which obviously is a thing that scales in and of itself, right? She's better at killing Drakes and Barons and things like that. And yeah, Shyvana landed in a pretty good spot overall, I would say. Shyvana is totally playable, landed, I think, right where the design team wanted her to land. She did so. Cool stuff. We talked about Sylas already. Definitely landed weak. This is a case where I think you would have to kind of, just to kind of reiterate, push really hard to say, okay, look, you have to do this build order and buy these items and scale in this way and go to this. Like, there's a lot of, like, require you to do X to get to a decent spot. Pros are good at doing the specific thing that gets them into a good spot. So, this can get a little awkward, but yeah, ultimately Sylas has very, very good late game, very weak early game, and very strong scaling. In addition to the automatic late game because of how well the abilities themselves scale with rank up. In addition to the actual stats he buys and his AP ratios. Again, we talked about these changes at length before. Everyone else, fairly minor updates that didn't mean a whole lot to me. I played a game of Omnistone earlier today. I played Omnistone Shyvana. Minor anecdote for me, I ganked top lane with Predator. Recalled, got Predator again. With one rune in between. I think we ganked top lane, killed the top lane, I got Electrocute, we took 2 turret plates, I recalled, Electrocute timed out, and then I re-got Predator and just ganked mid. So This is pretty good. And one thing that I really did notice, actually, and this is actually, I think, really, really worth bringing up. This is the kind of buff, now that I've played with it, at least one more time, that you're really going to feel, right? So in a jungle, right, you're going to hope you get Predator, right? That's ideal keystone at all times, is get Predator. But, this wouldn't drop below 7 seconds for like 6 levels. And it wouldn't drop down to 5 until like level 10 or something. Which is like obviously well past regular gank timing. This being a flat 5 seconds means in a lot of cases you can get a second keystone during a gank, especially if you're a crowd control jungler. Like if you're playing a Sejuani or a Skarner or a Zac or something, you can pretty reliably have a 5-second long gank to some degree. This can actually come into play and happen for you. Again, especially if you're doing a Predator stun gank, that okay, I got Predator off, and then also Electrocute is like, that's the real high roll there, and as soon as you get boots, I think you're in there. So what's also weird, though, is by getting Omnistone, you're tempted to get free boots. I think don't get free boots. I think you really want to get Predator as often as possible, so that every time you recall, you get back to lane sooner, or back to a gank sooner, which means you need to buy early boots if you're going to run this keystone. I really do like this keystone. I think it can be very good. It's not very popular, certainly, but I think there's really some positives here. And as it keeps getting buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed, it's gonna start showing up. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I personally like the keystone. I like using it. I think it's still very good on junglers who are happy to get Predator sometimes, and hopefully we start seeing some more of that. That's it for the patch rundown. Little sort of micro patch update. Hopefully this was interesting and entertaining. To quickly sum it back up, a lot of the buffs landed in really good spots. Sylas definitely needed the help. Definitely W max second on Sylas. Still max Q second on Sejuani. E is not close. Nami's OP. Mord landed in a good spot. Kassadin's still a bit too strong. Calista landed in a great spot. Definitely play her if you like her. Everyone else, more or less, you can kind of skip over. Oh yeah, Aphelios doesn't need to be banned anymore. That's a big one as well. You can drop the Aphelios ban. He's honestly not absurd anymore. At least not from what I can tell. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.